When 82-year-old Harold Jenkins' century-old barn finally collapsed during the worst storm to hit Millersville in decades, no one expected it would reveal a perfectly preserved World War II bunker hidden beneath the floorboards, or the chilling collection of classified documents that would connect his quiet farm to one of the war's most secretive intelligence operations. Little did his estranged grandson, history professor Michael Jenkins, know that the discovery would not only unravel his family's carefully guarded past, but also force him to re-examine everything he thought he knew about the grandfather who had become a stranger to him. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary story, tell us where you're watching from today. If you're fascinated by hidden history and family secrets, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's video reveals an unexpected connection to a famous WWII mission that historians have debated for decades. Harold Jenkins stood at the edge of his property, leaning heavily on his weathered oak cane as he surveyed the devastation. At 82, his once broad shoulders had begun to stoop, but his eyes remained sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows, taking in every detail of the collapsed barn that had stood on his family's land for over a century. The torrential rains that had battered Millersville for 3 straight days had finally accomplished what time and neglect had begun. The eastern wall had given way first, followed by the roof, leaving nothing but a chaotic heap of sodden timber and rusted metal. "Told you it needed reinforcing last spring," Sheriff Dan Collins remarked, standing beside the elderly farmer. At 58, Collins had known Harold his entire life, but the old man's stubbornness had only intensified with age. County inspector said it was a hazard. Harold's weathered face remained impassive. "Been standing since my grandfather raised it in 1911. Figured it'd outlast me, too." Only someone who knew him well would notice the slight tremor in his voice, the emotion he fought to conceal. "Well, the important thing is nobody was hurt," Collins offered, making notes on his clipboard. "Storms caused damage all over the county, but this is the worst structural collapse we've seen." Harold nodded absently, his attention caught by something in the wreckage. "Dan," he said quietly, "take a look at that." The sheriff followed Harold's gaze to where the floorboards had splintered and collapsed, revealing what appeared to be concrete. Beneath, not the dirt foundation both men would have expected. Something man-made and deliberate lay under the decades of accumulated hay and farm equipment. "What in the world?" Collins murmured, stepping carefully over broken beams to get a closer look. "Harold, did you know there was some kind of structure under your barn?" The old farmer's face had gone pale, his knuckles white around the handle of his cane. "No," he said, but something in his voice made the sheriff glance back sharply. "My father never mentioned anything like that." Collins crouched at the edge of the revelation, shining his flashlight into the exposed space. The beam illuminated a set of concrete steps leading downward into darkness. "Looks like some kind of cellar or bunker," he called back. "Entrance has been deliberately concealed beneath the floorboards." Harold remained frozen at the edge of the barn's remains, making no move to investigate further. "Probably just an old storm shelter," he suggested, but the waver in his voice betrayed him. "Maybe," Collins conceded, though his instincts, honed by nearly 30 years in law enforcement, told him otherwise. "Mind if I take a closer look?" "It's not safe," Harold objected quickly, too quickly. "Structure could still be unstable." "I'll be careful," Collins promised, already descending the exposed concrete steps, flashlight illuminating the way. "Just want to make sure there's nothing hazardous down here." Harold watched in uncharacteristic silence, his usual commanding presence diminished by what seemed to the sheriff like apprehension, or was it fear? The concrete stairway led to a heavy metal door, partially visible beneath fallen debris from the barn above. Collins carefully pushed aside a splintered beam, revealing a rusted wheel mechanism similar to those on naval vessels, not something typically found on a Midwestern farm. With effort, he managed to rotate the wheel, and the door opened with a protesting groan of metal that hadn't moved in decades. "Harold," he called back, "you might want to see this." The beam of his flashlight revealed a chamber approximately 15 by 20 feet, the walls made of reinforced concrete. Unlike the collapsed barn above, this underground room had withstood both time and the storm perfectly. Metal shelving lined the walls, holding cardboard boxes and file cabinets, while a military-style desk stood in the center, a chair tucked neatly beneath it, as though someone had just stepped away momentarily. Most striking were the faded maps affixed to one wall, showing European territories with markings and notations in faded ink. "This isn't a storm shelter," Collins said unnecessarily, as Harold finally appeared at the entrance, his reluctance evident in every halting step down the concrete stairs. "This looks military, World War II era, if I had to guess." Harold remained silent, his eyes moving across the room with an expression the sheriff couldn't quite decipher. Recognition mingled with resignation. "Harold," Collins said carefully, "did you know about this place?" The old farmer's shoulders sagged slightly. "No," he said finally, "but I think my father might have." Collins approached one of the file cabinets, gently pulling open a drawer that yielded with surprising ease, as though the mechanisms had been meticulously preserved. Inside, manila folders contained documents with headings like Operation Safe House and Field Intelligence Classified. "This is significant," Collins said, carefully replacing the folder. "These look like legitimate military intelligence documents. We need to contact proper authorities, historians, maybe military archivists." Harold's cane thumped sharply against the concrete floor. "No," he said with a flash of his characteristic firmness. "No authorities. This is private property." Collins turned, studying his old friend with newfound curiosity. "Harold, these could be historically important documents. This whole bunker might be significant." "It's just an old shelter," Harold insisted stubbornly. "Nothing worth making a fuss about." "This is military construction," Collins countered gently. "The documents, the maps, this was something official." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Your father, he fought in the war, didn't he?" "Served in Europe," Harold confirmed reluctantly. "Never talked much about it." "Well, someone talked enough to build a military-grade bunker under your barn," Collins observed, "and stock it with what looked like classified documents." Harold's weathered hand trembled slightly as he reached out to touch one of the maps on the wall. "My father was a simple farmer," he said, but the certainty had drained from his voice. "Came back from the war, took over the family land, raised me to do the same." "Maybe there was more to his war service than he shared," Collins suggested. Before Harold could respond, they were interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching on the gravel driveway. Collins checked his watch. "That'll be the county assessor. He's documenting storm damage throughout the area." He glanced meaningfully at Harold. "I haven't mentioned this discovery on the radio yet." Relief flickered across the old man's face. "Let's keep it that way," he said quickly, "at least until I figure things out." Collins nodded slowly. "I can give you a little time, Harold. But if these are legitimate military documents, they don't belong hidden away. History deserves the truth." "Some history is better left buried," Harold muttered. But Collins had already started up the stairs to intercept the county assessor. Left. Alone in the bunker, Harold moved with surprising purpose to the desk at the center of the room. With hands that now moved with certainty rather than confusion, he pulled open the center drawer and reached beneath it, finding a small lever that released a hidden compartment. From this secret space, he extracted a small leather-bound journal, tucking it quickly into his jacket pocket before following Collins up the stairs. Some secrets, he thought grimly, were never meant to be exposed to the light. 300 miles. Away in the book-lined office of Grayson University's History Department, Professor Michael Jenkins was delivering the final lecture of his popular course on World War II intelligence operations. At 38, he had established himself as one of the leading academic authorities on classified operations of the European theatre, his combination of rigorous research and engaging storytelling making his classes consistently oversubscribed. So while the Normandy landings rightfully dominate our historical memory of the Allied push into Europe, he concluded, it was these smaller, often undocumented intelligence operations that laid the crucial groundwork. Ordinary men and women, whose names rarely appear in history books, conducting extraordinary missions behind enemy lines. He closed the book on his lectern. Their stories remain largely untold, their records sealed or destroyed, leaving historians like us to piece together fragments and whispers. As students gathered their belongings, a teaching assistant approached with a note. "Call came in during your lecture," she explained. "Said it was urgent. Something about your grandfather." Michael frowned, taking the message. He hadn't spoken to his grandfather Harold in nearly a decade, their relationship fractured by a bitter argument that neither man had been willing to reconcile. The note contained a name, Sheriff Dan Collins, and a request to call as soon as possible regarding an urgent family matter. "Problem, Professor?" the assistant asked, noting his expression. "Not sure," Michael replied, already reaching for his phone. "Family complication." The word family felt strange in his mouth when referring to Harold Jenkins. The old man had raised him after his parents' death in a car accident when Michael was 8. But their relationship had always been complicated. Harold's emotional remoteness and rigid expectations creating a gulf that widened as Michael chose academics over farming. The breaking point had come when Michael published his first book on military intelligence operations, including speculation about rural American properties used as covert training facilities, a theory Harold had dismissed as reckless nonsense during their last explosive argument. The old man's vehemence had seemed disproportionate, but Michael had attributed it to his grandfather's general disdain for academic theorizing over practical knowledge. Now, as Michael dialed the number for the Millersville Sheriff's Department, he wondered what could possibly be urgent enough to bridge the decade of silence between them. "Sheriff Collins," came the response after 2 rings. "This is Professor Michael Jenkins, returning your call about my grandfather, Harold Jenkins." "Professor, thank you for calling back," Collins replied, his tone carefully measured. "There's been an incident at your grandfather's farm. The old barn collapsed during our recent storms." Michael's grip tightened on the phone. Despite their estrangement, the barn represented generations of his family's history. "Is he all right? Was anyone hurt?" "Your grandfather's fine," Collins assured him, but the collapse revealed something unusual beneath the structure. Something I think you, particularly given your academic specialty, might find significant." "What do you mean?" Michael asked. Academic curiosity piqued despite himself. "I'd rather not discuss specifics over the phone," Collins replied. "But given your expertise in World War II intelligence operations, I think you should come see for yourself, soon." The specific reference to his academic focus sent a jolt of surprise through Michael. "My grandfather asked you to call me?" A slight hesitation. "Not exactly. Harold is reluctant to have anyone examine what we've found. But as the county sheriff, I have some discretion in matters that might have historical significance." "And you think whatever's under the barn has historical significance?" "Professor Jenkins," Collins said carefully, "I've lived in Millersville my entire life, known your grandfather since I was a boy. What I found beneath that barn suggests there might be aspects of his father's, your great-grandfather's, war service that don't align with the simple farmer narrative Harold has always maintained." Michael sat down heavily in his office chair, thoughts racing. His great-grandfather, James Jenkins, had indeed served in World War II, but family law held that he had been a simple supply sergeant, returning home with little more than stories of European countryside and complaints about army food. Nothing in family records or tales had ever hinted at anything more significant. "What exactly did you find?" Michael pressed. "A concrete bunker," Collins replied. "Military-grade construction, filled with what appear to be classified documents from the 1940s, maps, intelligence files." For a moment, Michael couldn't speak, his academic mind already cataloguing the potential historical significance of such a discovery. "And my grandfather, he claimed no knowledge of this?" Another hesitation. "He says he didn't know it was there. But between us, Professor, I've known Harold Jenkins long enough to recognize when he's not being entirely forthcoming." Michael's free hand had already begun making notes. "I'll need to arrange coverage for my classes." "I wouldn't wait too long," Collins advised. "Your grandfather was asking about demolition companies this morning. Said the remains of the barn need to be cleared for safety reasons." The implication was clear. Harold Jenkins wanted whatever had been discovered buried once more, this time permanently. "I can be there by tomorrow afternoon," Michael decided. "Good." Collins sounded relieved. "I've secured the site for now. Sighted. Safety concerns to keep everyone away, but I can only stall your grandfather for so long." After ending the call, Michael sat motionless, staring at the World War II-era maps decorating his office walls. For years, he had studied the shadowy world of wartime intelligence, built his academic career on piecing together fragments of classified operations. Never once had he imagined that the key to an untold chapter might lie beneath the very ground where he had grown up, or that his taciturn grandfather might be the gatekeeper to such secrets. The irony wasn't lost on him. For a decade, he'd traveled to archives across Europe and America, conducted interviews with aging veterans, and scoured declassified documents, all while the evidence of something potentially groundbreaking had been literally beneath his feet. During his childhood on the farm, Michael began quickly organizing his notes and calendar, making arrangements for his teaching assistants to cover his remaining classes. Whatever lay beneath his grandfather's collapsed barn, he was determined to document and preserve it properly, with or without Harold's cooperation. As he packed his research equipment and prepared for the unexpected journey home, Michael couldn't help but wonder, what secrets had his great-grandfather buried beneath the family barn? And why was Harold so determined to keep them hidden, even from his own grandson? The questions multiplied as he drove home to pack for the trip. If the bunker truly contained classified intelligence documents, how had they ended up on a small Midwestern farm? Had his great-grandfather James been more than the simple supply sergeant family history suggested? And perhaps most troubling, what had Harold known about the bunker that he had kept hidden all these years? Michael realized that he was about to step into exactly the kind of historical mystery he had spent his career researching, only this time it was personal. The estrangement from his grandfather now seemed like a minor obstacle compared to the historical significance of what might lie beneath the ruins of the family barn. Whatever secrets the Jenkins farm had kept buried for nearly 8 decades, Michael was determined to bring them into the light, even if it meant confronting both the grandfather who had raised him and the carefully constructed family history he had never thought to question. The 5-hour drive to Millersville gave Michael ample time to reflect on his relationship with Harold Jenkins. The farmland had been in their family for 4 generations, each Jenkins son expected to continue the legacy of working the soil. Michael had been the exception, orphaned at 8, raised by a grandfather who viewed academia with suspicion, and ultimately choosing books over the plough in a decision that had fractured their relationship beyond repair, or so he had thought. As Interstate 70 gave way to smaller highways, then to the familiar county roads of his youth, Michael found himself rehearsing what he might say to the man he hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. Would Harold refuse to see him, bar him from the property? The uncertainty tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the rental car crested the final hill that revealed Millersville in the valley below. The town hadn't changed much, the same. Water tower painted with the high school mascot, the same four-block Main Street with its hardware store, diner and courthouse. What had changed was Michael's perspective, the eyes of a man now viewing what the boy had taken for granted. This place had been home once, its rhythms and limitations both comforting and confining. His GPS directed him to the sheriff's department, a modest brick building across from the courthouse. Inside, the receptionist looked up with the curious expression of someone who immediately recognized him as both familiar and out of place. "Michael Jenkins," she said, breaking into a smile. "Nancy Wilson. We were in the same grade. Homecoming. Ehort's senior year, remember?" Michael managed a polite smile, dimly recalling a younger version of the woman before him. "Of course, Nancy. Good to see you. I'm here to meet Sheriff Collins." "He's expecting you," she confirmed, the curiosity in her eyes intensifying. "Said to send you right back when you arrived." Dan Collins hadn't been sheriff when Michael left Millersville, but he remembered the man as a deputy who had occasionally stopped by the farm to chat with Harold. The years had added grey to his hair and lines to his face, but his handshake was firm when he greeted Michael in his office. "Professor Jenkins," he said, gesturing to a chair, "appreciate you coming on such short notice." "Your call was intriguing," Michael replied carefully. "Have you spoken with my grandfather since yesterday?" Collins leaned back in his chair. "Checked on him this morning. He's as stubborn as ever, insisting the bunker is nothing significant, just some old storage space his father built. Already has a demolition crew scheduled for next week to clear everything and pour a concrete slab. That seems hasty," Michael observed. "More than hasty. Deliberate," Collins agreed. "I managed to delay things by declaring it an investigation. Site for now. Safety concerns from the structural collapse, but legally I can only hold that position for a limited time without evidence of something requiring official intervention." "And do you have such evidence?" Collins reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a manila folder. "I took photos before your grandfather realized what I'd found. Didn't have much time to examine the documents in detail, but what I saw—" He pushed the folder across the desk. "Well, you're the historian. You tell me." Michael opened the folder to find several photos showing the bunker's interior. Metal shelving, file cabinets, maps on the walls. One close-up showed a document header reading Operation Safe House Station 12, Midwest Division, with a classification stamp clearly visible. Another captured a map of Europe with marked locations, lines connecting them to points in the rural United States. "This is," Michael began, professional excitement momentarily overriding personal complications. "Sheriff, if these documents are authentic, they could represent an undocumented domestic extension of wartime intelligence operations. The historical significance would be substantial. Authentic enough that your grandfather is in an almighty hurry to bury them again," Collins noted, "which raises questions I'm not comfortable ignoring given my position." Michael looked up from the photos. "What kind of questions?" Collins chose his words carefully. "I've known your grandfather my entire life. He's a respected member of this community, a man whose word has always been his bond. But his reaction to this discovery, it wasn't surprise, Professor. It was recognition and fear. Fear of what? That's what I'm hoping you might help determine," Collins replied. "As I see it, there are three possibilities. One, these are legitimate historical documents that Harold, for whatever reason, wants to keep private. Two, there's something in that bunker that could be embarrassing to your family's history. Or three, He hesitated. 3. Something that might have present-day implications. Something that hasn't been just history for a very long time. Michael stared at the sheriff, processing the suggestion. You think my 82-year-old grandfather is involved in something, what, illegal, dangerous? Collins held up his hands placatingly. I'm just listing possibilities. The reaction doesn't match a simple historical discovery, and in my line of work, unusual reactions merit investigation. Michael closed the folder, his academic excitement now tempered by concern. I need to see this bunker for myself, and talk to my grandfather. That's why I called you, Collins agreed, standing. I'll drive you out there now. Fair warning, he may not welcome either of us with open arms. The Jenkins farm appeared on the horizon, its white two-story farmhouse standing in stark contrast to the green fields surrounding it. Michael felt an unexpected tightness in his chest at the sight. This land held his earliest memories, both the happy ones of exploring fields with childhood wonder and the difficult ones of a grieving boy trying to connect with a grandfather, ill-equipped to raise a child alone. As they turned onto the gravel driveway, the collapsed barn came into view, its splintered timbers and metal roofing a chaotic pile where a proud structure had stood for over a century. Yellow caution tape cordoned off the area, and in the center of the devastation, the concrete stairs leading downward were now clearly visible. Collins parked beside a familiar blue pickup truck that had seen better days. He's home, the sheriff observed unnecessarily. Want me to do the talking first? Michael shook his head, squaring his shoulders. No, this is family business, complicated as that may be. They found Harold in the kitchen, seated at the same oak table where Michael had eaten countless meals as a child. The old man looked up from his coffee as they entered, his weathered face revealing a momentary flash of emotion before settling into a guarded expression. Figured you'd call him, Harold said to Collins, not acknowledging his grandson directly. Wasting his time and yours over nothing but an old storage cellar. Hello, grandfather, Michael said, the formal address feeling strange on his tongue after so many years. It's been a long time, Harold grunted, still not meeting his eyes. Professor now, I hear, big expert on war history. That's right. Well, nothing of interest to professors here. Just a working farm with a collapsed barn that needs clearing. He finally looked directly at Michael, challenge in his gaze. Unless you've finally come to your senses about taking over the family land. The familiar argument threatened to reignite, but Michael refused to be baited. I've come because Sheriff Collins showed me photos of what appears to be a World War II-era intelligence bunker beneath your barn. As both a historian and a member of this family, I have an interest in preserving what might be significant historical documents. Private property, Harold insisted stubbornly. What's under my barn is my business. Actually, Collins interjected carefully, if those are legitimate military documents, especially if they remain technically classified, there may be federal interests to consider. Harold's hand tightened around his coffee mug. My father built this farm into something that could support generations, worked himself to the bone after serving his country. Whatever's in that hole in the ground doesn't change that legacy. It might enhance it, Michael suggested. If great-grandfather James was involved in intelligence work during the war, that's something our family could be proud of. Proud, Harold repeated, an unexpected bitterness in his voice. You don't know what you're talking about, boy. Some things are better left buried. Why? Michael pressed. What's in those documents that you're afraid of? I never said I was afraid, Harold snapped, but the slight tremor in his hand betrayed him. Then let me examine them, Michael proposed. As a historian, I can help determine their significance. If they're merely personal papers or commonplace military documents, I'll be the first to say so. Harold fell silent, conflict evident in his expression. Finally, he sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 82 years. You always were stubborn, just like your father, just like me. It was as close to personal as the old man. had gotten in their conversation, Michael recognized the slight opening and pressed his advantage. "One day, give me 1 day to document what's down there. Then we can discuss next steps." Harold's eyes narrowed. "And if I refuse?" Collins shifted uncomfortably. "As I mentioned yesterday, Harold, if those are classified government documents, I would be obligated to report their existence to appropriate authorities." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Harold stared into his coffee for a long moment before pushing himself to his feet with effort. "1 day," he conceded reluctantly. "Just you. Not a team of university people tramping all over my property. And anything personal, anything about my father that isn't directly related. Do official business that stays private, family business." "Agreed," Michael said quickly, before the old man could reconsider. Harold reached for his cane, propped against the wall. "Well, daylight's wasting. Let's get this over with." The 3 men made their way across the yard to the collapsed barn. Harold moved slowly but deliberately, his cane thumping against the hard-packed earth with each step. At the yellow caution tape, he paused, gazing at the ruins with an unreadable expression. "My grandfather raised this barn in 1911, he said quietly. "My father reinforced it in 46 after he came back from Europe. I replaced the roof in 78, thought it would stand another 100 years. The note of genuine loss in his voice reminded Michael that whatever secrets might lie beneath the structure, the barn itself represented generations of Jenkins family history. "I'm sorry," he offered. "I know what this place meant to you." Harold gave him a sharp look, as though surprised by the empathy. Without responding, he ducked under the caution tape and picked his way carefully through the debris to the exposed concrete stairs. "Mind the loose boards," he cautioned, his farmer's practicality reasserting itself. "Step where I step." The descent into the bunker was more challenging for Harold than he would admit, but he refused assistance from either younger man. At the metal door, now propped open with a piece of fallen timber, he hesitated just long enough for Michael to register his reluctance before continuing inside. Collins flipped a switch, and to Michael's surprise, a series of overhead lights illuminated the space, revealing much more than the photos had captured. The bunker was larger than he'd estimated from the images, its concrete walls lined with metal shelving containing dozens of file boxes, each meticulously labeled. The maps on the far wall were extensive, covering not just Europe but parts of the Pacific Theater as well. Most intriguing was a large safe in one corner, its dial mechanism suggesting 1940s military design. "Electricity still works," Michael observed, unable to keep the amazement from his voice. "Generator system," Harold explained grudgingly. "Self-contained. My father maintained it regularly until he died. I kept it up after, thought it was just a backup for the farm. Never knew what it was really powering." The claim of ignorance rang hollow, especially given Collins's observation about Harold's reaction to the discovery. Michael approached one of the shelving units, examining the box labels without touching them. "Operation Safe House," he read aloud. "Station 12 Field Reports, 1943-1945. Don't recognize any of these operation names from the standard historical record," he continued, moving along the shelf. "This could represent a completely undocumented program." He turned to his grandfather. "You really never knew this was here? Never came down these stairs as a child?" Harold's jaw tightened. "The barn was off limits unless my father was present. Said it wasn't safe for children to play around the equipment. There was a trap door under the central stall, always kept padlocked. I assumed it was a root cellar or storage space. Never had reason to question it. And after he died, you inherited the farm but never checked what was under that padlock?" The old man's eyes flashed. "My father's last words to me were to keep the farm running, keep the family legacy intact, and never open that door. Said it was a promise he'd made during the war, a matter of national security that didn't expire with peace treaties. I respected his wishes. Michael absorbed this information, its implications significant. So you did know there was something here, something important enough that your father gave a deathbed instruction about it. Harold looked away. Knowing something exists and knowing what it contains are different matters. I kept my promise until a storm made that impossible, Collins observed. Harold nodded grimly. Some promises can't be kept forever, it seems. Michael approached the central desk, where a leather blotter still held pens and pencils arranged, with military precision. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the desk drawers. After a hesitation, Harold nodded once. The top drawer contained what Michael expected: notepads, additional writing implements, paper clips. The second drawer held a stack of blank telegram forms and official stationery, with a now unfamiliar military division header. The third drawer was locked. "Key?" Michael asked, looking up at his grandfather. "Don't have it," Harold replied too quickly. Collins and Michael exchanged glances. "Harold," the sheriff said gently, "we're trying to handle this as discreetly and respectfully as possible, but locked drawers in a secret military bunker raise obvious questions." The old man remained stubbornly silent. Michael turned his attention to the safe in the corner. "What about this? Do you have the combination?" "If I did, I wouldn't share it," Harold replied firmly. "Some things aren't meant to be dug up, Michael. Some secrets stay buried for good reasons." "What reasons?" Michael pressed. "What are you afraid we'll find?" Harold fixed him with a piercing stare. "The truth about war is rarely what gets printed in history books. Men do what needs doing in desperate times. Your great-grandfather served his country in ways that wouldn't fit neatly into your university, lectures or published papers, ways that were necessary but not meant for public consumption." The implications sent a chill through Michael. "Are you suggesting he was involved in something questionable?" "I'm suggesting," Harold replied carefully, "that judging the actions of men at war through the lens of peacetime morality is a fool's game, especially when you don't have all the facts." Michael approached the maps on the wall, studying them with a historian's trained eye. They showed various European locations, marked with different colored pins and coded notations. Lines connected these points to locations in the United States, including, he noticed with a jolt, the precise coordinates of the Jenkins farm. "This wasn't just any intelligence operation," he murmured, tracing the connections. "This farm was an active station in a network, Station 12, according to these files." He turned back to Harold. "What was happening here during the war?" "Nothing," Harold insisted. "My father was overseas until 45. My mother ran the farm with help from neighbors. I was just a boy." "The documentation suggests otherwise," Michael countered, gesturing to the maps. "This place was operational. These files contain reports. Someone was actively working here." Harold's expression hardened. "You have your one day, Professor. Catalog whatever official documents you want, take your photos, write your papers. But some things in this room are family matters, not historical records. Those stay private." Without waiting for a response, he turned and made his way laboriously back up the concrete stairs, leaving Michael and Sheriff Collins alone in the underground chamber that had suddenly complicated every assumption Michael had held about his family history. "Well," Collins said into the silence, "I'd say that confirms there's more to this story than a simple forgotten storage space." Michael nodded, his historian's mind already categorizing and analyzing. "Much more. The question is whether it's merely historically significant or something that concerns you in an official capacity." "That depends on what we find," Collins replied. "I'll give you some privacy to examine these materials. I've got other storm damage to check on, but I'll swing back by this afternoon." He paused at the foot of the stairs. "Just be careful what you unlock here, Professor. Family secrets have a way of changing more than just historical records." Left alone in the bunker, Michael stood motionless for a moment, absorbing the reality of what surrounded him. He had spent his career piecing together fragments of World War II intelligence operations from redacted documents and reluctant veterans' memories. Now, he faced what appeared to be a pristine, untouched archive of a covert operation that had literally been beneath his feet throughout his childhood. With methodical care, he began to document the room's contents, photographing each shelf, drawer, and map before disturbing anything. Whatever secrets this underground chamber contained, he was determined to approach them with the proper respect, both as a historian and as the great-grandson of the man who had apparently been entrusted with keeping them. The academic excitement of discovery warred with a growing personal unease. Harold's reaction suggested that whatever lay within these files, it had the power to change how Michael viewed not just his great-grandfather, but perhaps the very foundations of the family narrative he had taken for granted his entire life. For the next several hours, Michael worked methodically through the bunker's contents, his training as a historian guiding his approach. He began by creating a detailed inventory, documenting each shelf and cabinet before examining individual files. His phone camera filled with images of documents, maps, and the bunker's layout, while his notebook accumulated observations and questions. The more he uncovered, the more his professional excitement grew. This wasn't just any intelligence operation. It appeared to be part of a network that had never been fully documented in official histories. According to the file headers, Operation Safe House had involved rural properties across the American Midwest, each serving as a secure location for activities that remained frustratingly unspecified in the top-level documents. Station 12, Michael murmured, reading the designation repeatedly assigned to the Jenkins farm. What made this ordinary family property valuable to military intelligence? And why had his great-grandfather been selected to participate? The most immediately accessible files contained administrative records, supply inventories, maintenance schedules, equipment requisitions, mundane details that nonetheless confirmed the bunker had been actively used throughout 1943 and 1944. With operations tapering off in early 1945 as Allied forces advanced across Europe. The documents were meticulous, reflecting military precision, but deliberately vague about the station's actual purpose. Michael's attention kept returning to the locked drawer in the central desk and the imposing safe in the corner. Whatever revealed the true nature of Operation Safe House likely resided in those secured locations. After attempting various common combinations on the safe, military dates, his great-grandfather's birthday, the farm's establishment year, he turned his focus to the locked drawer. A thorough examination of the desk revealed no hidden key, but Michael's experience with historical archives had taught him that people in past eras often used simpler security measures than we might expect. Removing the drawer above the locked one, he ran his fingers along the underside and was rewarded with the discovery of a small key taped to the wood. "Predictable, but effective," he said aloud, carefully removing the key. It fit perfectly into the locked drawer, which opened with a satisfying click. Inside lay a single leather-bound ledger, its cover unmarked except for the years 1943 to 1945, embossed in faded gold. Michael lifted it carefully, noting the weight and substantial thickness. Opening to the first page, he found a handwritten entry dated June 15, 1943. Station 12 operational as of today. Captain Jenkins commanding. Facilities prepared according to specifications. Awaiting first assignment. May God help us succeed where conventional warfare cannot. The handwriting matched samples Michael had seen of his great-grandfathers from family letters and documents. Flowing but precise, the penmanship of a man educated in an era when handwriting was considered a reflection of character. The mention of Captain Jenkins commanding confirmed what Michael had begun to suspect. James Jenkins had not been a mere supply sergeant, as family law maintained. Turning pages revealed daily entries, mostly brief logistical notes and oblique references to packages received or assets dispatched. Occasionally, more detailed entries hinted at the station's activities. August 3rd, 1943. Asset Nightingale arrived, age 200 hours. Condition poor but stabilizing. Extraction from Lyon successful despite complications. Intelligence regarding facility. X confirmed, beyond our worst estimates. Dispatching report through secure channel. Asset recovery expected to take minimum 3 weeks before transport possible. October 17th, 1943. Blacksmith and tinker delivered by transport team. Materials recovered from Berlin laboratory beyond anything anticipated. Tinker remains uncooperative, despite assurances of protection. Blacksmith's technical knowledge proves invaluable. Engineering diagrams completed for transmission to Washington. Containment protocols in place as per directive. December 8, 1943. Christmas preparations maintained for appearance of normalcy. Station remains at heightened alert following security breach at Station 7. No indication our location is compromised, but additional precautions implemented. 3 assets currently in residence. Margaret continues to excel in her role, though the strain of balancing appearances with operational security wears on her. The boy asks questions I cannot answer. This last entry caught Michael's attention sharply. The boy could only refer to Harold, who would have been around 7 years old in 1943. And Margaret was Michael's great-grandmother, portrayed in family stories as a simple farmer's wife maintaining the homestead while her husband served. Overseas, these entries suggested a far more complex reality, one where both James and Margaret Jenkins were actively involved in intelligence operations conducted on their own property. "I'm suggesting," Harold replied carefully, "that judging the actions of men at war through the lens of peacetime morality is a fool's game, especially when you don't have all the facts." Michael approached the maps on the wall, studying them. With a historian's trained eye, they showed various European locations, marked with different colored pins and coded notations. Lines connected these points to locations in the United States, including, he noticed with a jolt, the precise coordinates of the Jenkins farm. "This wasn't just any intelligence operation," he murmured, tracing the connections. "This farm was an active station in a network, Station 12, according to these files." He turned back to Harold. "What was happening here during the war?" "Nothing," Harold insisted. "My father was overseas until 45. My mother ran the farm with help from neighbors. I was just a boy." "The documentation suggests otherwise," Michael countered, gesturing to the maps. "This place was operational. These files contain reports. Someone was actively working here." Harold's expression hardened. "You have your one day, Professor. Catalogue whatever official documents you want. Take your photos, write your papers, but some things in this room are family matters, not historical records. Those stay private." Without waiting for a response, he turned and made his way laboriously back up the concrete stairs, leaving Michael and Sheriff Collins alone in the underground chamber that had suddenly complicated every assumption Michael had held about his family history. "Well," Collins said into the silence, "I'd say that confirms there's more to this story than a simple forgotten storage space." Michael nodded, his historian's mind already categorizing and analyzing. "Much more. The question is whether it's merely historically significant or something that concerns you in an official capacity." "That depends on what we find," Collins replied. "I'll give you some privacy to examine these materials. I've got other storm damage to check on, but I'll swing back by this afternoon." He paused at the foot of the stairs. "Just be careful," What you unlock here, Professor, family secrets have a way of changing more than just historical records. Left alone in the bunker, Michael stood motionless for a moment, absorbing the reality of what surrounded him. He had spent his career piecing together fragments of World War II intelligence operations from redacted documents and reluctant veterans. Memories? Now he faced what appeared to be a pristine, untouched archive of a covert operation that had literally been beneath his feet throughout his childhood. With methodical care, he began to document the room's contents, photographing each shelf, drawer, and map before disturbing anything. Whatever secrets this underground chamber contained, he was determined to approach them with the proper respect, both as a historian and as the great-grandson of the man who had apparently been entrusted with keeping them. The academic excitement of discovery warred with a growing personal unease. Harold's reaction suggested that whatever lay within these files, it had the power to change how Michael viewed not just his great-grandfather, but perhaps the very foundations of the family narrative he had taken for granted his entire life. For the next several hours, Michael worked methodically through the bunker's contents, his training as a historian guiding his approach. He began by creating a detailed inventory, documenting each shelf and cabinet before examining individual files. His phone camera filled with images of documents, maps, and the bunker's layout, while his notebook accumulated observations and questions. The more he uncovered, the more his professional excitement grew. This wasn't just any intelligence operation. It appeared to be part of a network that had never been fully documented in official histories. According to the file headers, Operation Safehouse had involved rural properties across the American Midwest, each serving as a secure location for activities that remained frustratingly unspecified in the top-level documents. Station 12, Michael murmured, reading the designation repeatedly assigned to the Jenkins farm. What made this ordinary family property valuable to military intelligence? And why had his great-grandfather been selected to participate? The most immediately accessible files contained administrative records, supply inventories, maintenance schedules, equipment requisitions, mundane details that nonetheless confirmed the bunker had been actively used throughout 1943 and 1944, with operations tapering off in early 1945 as Allied forces advanced across Europe. The documents were meticulous, reflecting military precision, but deliberately vague about the station's actual purpose. Michael's attention kept returning to the locked drawer in the central desk and the imposing safe in the corner. Whatever revealed the true nature of Operation Safehouse likely resided in those secured locations. After attempting various common combinations on the safe, military dates, his great-grandfather's birthday, the farm's establishment year, he turned his focus to the locked drawer. A thorough examination of the desk revealed no hidden key, but Michael's experience with historical archives had taught him that people in past eras often used simpler security measures than we might expect. Removing the drawer above the locked one, he ran his fingers along the underside and was rewarded with the discovery of a small key taped to the wood. "Predictable but effective," he said aloud, carefully removing the key. It fit perfectly into the locked drawer, which opened with a satisfying click. Inside lay a single leather-bound ledger, its cover unmarked except for the years 1943-1945, embossed in faded gold. Michael lifted it carefully, noting the weight and substantial thickness. Opening to the first page, he found a handwritten entry dated June 15th, 1943. Station 12 operational as of today. Captain Jenkins commanding. Facilities prepared according to specifications. Awaiting first assignment. May God help us succeed where conventional warfare cannot. The handwriting matched samples Michael had seen of his great-grandfathers from family letters and documents. Flowing but precise, the penmanship of a man educated in an era when handwriting was considered a reflection of character. The mention of Captain Jenkins commanding confirmed what Michael had begun to suspect. James Jenkins had not been a mere supply sergeant, as family law maintained. Turning pages revealed daily entries, mostly brief logistical notes, and oblique references to packages received or assets dispatched. Occasionally, more detailed entries hinted at the station's activities. August 3, 1943. Asset Nightingale arrived 0200 hours. Condition poor but stabilizing. Extraction from Lion successful despite complications. Intelligence regarding facility. X confirmed. Beyond our worst estimates. Dispatching report through secure channel. Asset recovery expected to take minimum 3 weeks before transport possible. October 17, 1943. Blacksmith and tinker delivered by transport team. Materials recovered from Berlin laboratory beyond anything anticipated. Tinker remains uncooperative. Despite assurances of protection, Blacksmith's technical knowledge proves invaluable. Engineering diagrams completed for transmission to Washington. Containment protocols in place as per directive. December 8, 1943. Christmas preparations maintained for appearance of normalcy. Station remains at heightened alert following security breach at Station 7. No indication our location is compromised, but additional precautions implemented. 3 assets currently in residence. Margaret continues to excel in her role, though the strain of balancing appearances with operational security wears on her. The boy asks questions I cannot answer. This last entry caught Michael's attention sharply. The boy could only refer to Harold, who would have been around 7 years old in 1943. And Margaret was Michael's great-grandmother, portrayed in family stories as a simple farmer's wife, maintaining the homestead while her husband served. Overseas, these entries suggested a far more complex reality, one where both James and Margaret Jenkins were actively involved in intelligence operations conducted on their own property. The ledger entries continued through 1944, growing increasingly technical with references to scientific equipment, laboratory protocols, and specialized personnel. Whatever Operation Safehouse entailed, it clearly involved more than just housing resistance operatives or gathering intelligence. The Jenkins farm appeared to have functioned as some kind of specialized facility, though the exact nature remained frustratingly vague in the captain's careful documentation. As Michael flipped to the entries for early 1945, the tone changed. Noticeably, February 12, 1945, official termination of Station 12 operations received from command. Decommissioning protocols initiated, assets relocated to Facility Alpine, technical materials secured for transport, records to be sealed as per Protocol Omega-7. Margaret troubled by ethical implications of our work here, especially following Dresden. I share her concerns, but maintain that our actions, while morally complex, served necessary ends. History will judge us, but likely never know us. February 20th, 1945. Final materials removed. All evidence of advanced operations eliminated. Remaining conventional documents secured in containment vault. I am ordered to maintain this facility indefinitely as insurance against future necessities. Command explicit that certain knowledge must remain accessible but protected from unauthorized discovery. The burden of this responsibility is considerable, but I will honor my oath. March 3rd, 1945. Station 12, officially dormant. I returned to conventional military assignment in European theater to maintain cover story. Margaret will continue exceptional service maintaining security here. God willing, we have seen the last of war's necessities requiring this place's darkest capabilities. If not, the facility remains ready. These final entries raised more questions than they answered. What darkest capabilities had been utilized at the seemingly innocent Midwestern farm? What ethical implications had troubled Michael's great-grandmother? And what materials had been so sensitive they required indefinite, secured storage even after the operation concluded? A soft noise from the stairway interrupted Michael's reading. He looked up to find Harold watching him from the threshold, leaning heavily on his cane, his expression unreadable. "Found the ledger, I see," the old man said quietly. Michael nodded, carefully closing the worn leather cover. Captain James Jenkins, not sergeant, station commander, not a supply officer, a completely different war experience than you ever described. Harold entered the bunker fully, making his way to a metal folding chair in the corner and lowering himself with a slight wince. The official record says sergeant. His discharge papers say sergeant. His military benefits came as a sergeant. That's what he wanted the world to know. But you knew different. Bits and pieces, Harold acknowledged. Children absorb more than adults realize, even when they don't understand what they're seeing. I knew strangers came and went. I knew parts of the barn were forbidden. I knew my parents spoke in whispers when they thought I was asleep. But after the war, surely he told you something. Harold shook his head. My father believed some burdens shouldn't be passed down. When he knew he was dying, he showed me this place, gave me basic maintenance instructions for the generator and dehumidification systems. Said it was my duty to preserve it, unopened and undisturbed, a responsibility to my country, regardless of whether the country ever acknowledged it. And you never looked inside the files? Never read his ledger? Michael asked, incredulous. Flash of the old stubbornness crossed Harold's face. A promise is a promise. My father said what was in these files could damage people still living, jeopardize national security even decades later. That was enough for me. Michael gestured to the ledger. These entries suggest Operation Safehouse wasn't just intelligence gathering. There are references to laboratories, technical materials, assets with specialized knowledge. The Jenkins farm appears to have been some kind of scientific facility. I told you, Harold said quietly. Some things are better left buried. I'm a historian, grandfather. My entire profession is built on the belief that truth matters, that understanding our past helps us navigate our present. Whatever happened here is part of our family's history, part of our nation's history. And what if that history is uglier than the textbooks prepare you for? Harold challenged. What if good men made choices in desperate times that look monstrous? Through the lens of peacetime morality, are you prepared to judge your own blood with the smug certainty of someone who's never faced the choices they faced? The intensity of the old man's question gave Michael pause. I'm not here to judge, he said more gently. I'm trying to understand. Harold was silent for a long moment, conflict evident in his weathered features. Finally, he sighed heavily. There's a combination for the safe. My father made me memorize it. Said if circumstances ever arose where the contents needed to be secured or destroyed, I'd need access. Will you share it? Another long pause. 7/24/1945-12. The day the war ended for him, July 24th, 1945, and Station 12's designation. But Michael, he leaned forward, his gaze intense. Before you open that safe, be certain you're prepared for what you might find. Some knowledge changes you, changes how you see everything and everyone. Michael approached the safe, turning the dial carefully to each number in sequence. With the final alignment, the mechanism released with an audible click. He glanced back at Harold, who had risen from his chair and now stood watching with evident apprehension. Whatever's in there, Michael said, it's part of our family story. We face it together. The safe door opened smoothly despite decades of disuse, revealing several items arranged with military precision. On top lay a sealed manila envelope marked Operation Safehouse, Executive Summary, Eyes Only. Beneath it sat a stack of technical drawings, a small metal box, and a collection of black and white photographs secured with twine. Michael removed the envelope first, breaking the seal carefully. Inside, he found a typewritten document bearing multiple top-secret stamps and the signatures of several high-ranking military officials, most notably General Leslie Groves, a name Michael recognized immediately as the military head of the Manhattan Project. "Oh my God," he breathed as he began to read. Operation Safe House Executive Summary. Following successful extraction of key scientific personnel from German advanced weapons programs, Operations Alsos and Paperclip, the necessity arose for specialized handling of certain assets and materials outside established military research installations. Due to security concerns, compartmentalization of knowledge, and the ethically sensitive nature of certain research avenues, Operation Safe House was established to create covert facilities utilizing non-military properties with personnel selected for exceptional reliability and discretion. Station 12, Jenkins Facility, was designated for biological containment and associated research due to its rural isolation, existing agricultural infrastructure providing cover for unusual supply requirements, and the unique qualifications of Captain James Jenkins, specialized training in both military intelligence and biological sciences. Primary function: secure housing and debriefing of scientific assets with knowledge of German biological weapons programs. Secondary laboratory facilities for containment and neutralization of biological samples recovered from German territory. Assets processed: 8 scientific personnel extracted from German research facilities, primarily associated with laboratories. At Redacted and the Special Research Division of Unnerbe Medical Experiments, technical documentation related to weaponized biological agents with potential applications exceeding anything currently in Allied scientific understanding. Special notation: materials secured from Facility X, see Appendix C, represent significant ethical concerns. While no direct experimentation occurred at Station 12, the scientific knowledge derived from German programs required careful evaluation regarding potential military applications versus moral considerations. Materials deemed too sensitive for integration into American research programs have been neutralized and documentation secured within this facility. Michael lowered the document, his academic training temporarily overwhelmed by the personal implications. The Manhattan Project connection, biological weapons research, Nazi scientific personnel. This goes well beyond anything I would have imagined. Harold nodded grimly. Now you understand why some doors stay locked. Turning his attention to the photographs, Michael untied the twine binding them. The top image showed a group of men in civilian clothes standing before the Jenkins farmhouse. Among them, a younger version of his great-grandfather, looking far more authoritative than family photos had ever captured him. The other men had small numbers written on the back of the photograph, identifying them only as Asset 1 through Asset 4. The next photograph, dated October 1943, showed what appeared to be the bunker configured as a laboratory, with equipment Michael didn't recognize, and several men in white coats examining documents spread across a table. His great-grandmother appeared in one corner, dressed not as a farmer's wife, but wearing what appeared to be a nurse's uniform, attending to some kind of medical equipment. "Your grandmother was a military nurse before she married my father," Harold said, noticing Michael's focus on the image. That part of the family history was at least partially true. She met him during his officer training. What no one mentioned was that her specialty was infectious disease control. Michael continued through the photographs, each revealing aspects of Operation Safe House that contradicted everything he had believed about his family's history. The final image, however, stopped him cold. It showed his great-grandfather standing beside a distinguished-looking man in a German-cut suit, both examining some kind of laboratory equipment. Even with the poor image quality and the passage of decades, Michael recognized the German from historical archives he had studied. "This is Dr. Heinrich Schäfer," he said, the academic part of his brain automatically supplying the identification. He was a leading German biological weapons researcher, presumed to have died during Allied bombing in 1943. He looked up at Harold. Except, apparently, he didn't die. He was here, at our farm. "Asset 2, Harold confirmed quietly. "I remember him. He taught me German words when my mother wasn't listening. I thought he was just one of the foreign visitors my father sometimes hosted. I was 7 years old. What did I know of war or Nazi scientists?" The revelation sent Michael's thoughts spinning. The Jenkins farm, his family's homestead for generations, had been a secret facility housing extracted Nazi scientists and containing biological weapons research. His great-grandparents, far from being simple rural Americans serving their country in conventional ways, had been deeply embedded in one of the war's most morally complex operations. The metal box remained unopened on the safe shelf. Harold noticed Michael's gaze shift toward it. "That contains microfilm," he said, "the complete technical documentation from what they called Facility X. My father said it was insurance, proof of what had been done and what had been stopped. Said if certain parties ever tried to restart the research, the evidence would ensure public exposure." "What was Facility X?" Michael asked, though part of him already feared the answer. Harold's expression darkened. "From the little my father shared when he knew he was dying, a German research station where biological weapons were tested on human subjects. Concentration camp prisoners mostly. The kind of research that decent scientists wouldn't conduct but would desperately want. The results from. And those results ended up here," Michael said, "the historical and ethical implications staggering, along with the scientists who produced them," Harold confirmed. "Men whose knowledge was deemed too valuable to lose, despite how they obtained it. My father's job was to extract everything they knew, determine what could be ethically utilized, and ensure the rest never saw the light of day." He gestured around the bunker. "This place wasn't just for storage, it was for quarantine, of people, of knowledge, of moral compromise." Michael sat heavily in the desk chair, trying to process the implications. His academic understanding of Operation Paperclip and other efforts to secure German scientific knowledge had always been somewhat abstract, historical events to analyze and document. Now those events had faces, had a direct connection to his own bloodline. The moral complexities were no longer theoretical, but deeply personal. "Does this change your view of your great-grandfather?" Harold asked, watching him closely. "Knowing he worked with Nazi scientists, that he extracted and utilized knowledge obtained through atrocity?" Michael considered the question carefully. "It complicates it," he admitted. "But war creates impossible choices. From what I'm seeing, he tried to navigate those choices with some kind of moral compass intact. He preserved evidence rather than destroying it. He contained dangerous knowledge rather than exploiting it fully." Harold nodded slowly. "That's more charitable than many would be. When he knew he was dying, he told me his greatest fear was that history would judge men like him as collaborators rather than as guardians." The old man's voice grew quieter. "He believed they'd saved lives by controlling this knowledge rather than allowing it to proliferate unchecked, that the compromise was worth the cost. Why maintain this facility for so long after the war? After his death?" "Insurance," Harold replied simply. "As long as certain people lived, scientists, officials, who authorized the program, potential enemies who might benefit from the research, the evidence needed to exist. A dead man's switch, he called it. If anything happened to our family, if the farm was seized or sold, instructions would trigger the contents being sent to multiple newspaper editors. Michael glanced again at the microfilm box. And now, most of those people must be long dead, which is why I plan to finally destroy it all after the barn collapsed, Harold admitted. No more need for insurance, no more burden to carry. He fixed Michael with a penetrating look until you arrived with your historian's curiosity and sense of obligation to the truth. The way he said the truth carried a weight of ambivalence that Michael couldn't ignore. Do you believe this should all be destroyed? That the historical record should remain incomplete? Harold was silent for a long moment. What I believe, he finally said, is that my father and mother carried a terrible burden to their graves. They did things in war that haunted them in peace, but they believed they'd served their country honorably, despite the moral compromises. They believed the world was safer because of choices they made. He gestured to the documents surrounding them. What happens if you publish all this? Who benefits? Who gets hurt? Does exposing the full truth of Operation Safehouse serve any purpose beyond historical curiosity? It was a profound question, one that forced Michael to confront the potential consequences of his professional instincts. The historian in him insisted that truth mattered, that documentation and preservation were inherent goods. But the grandson in him heard the pain in Harold's voice, understood the complexity of the legacy he had carried silently for decades. I don't have a simple answer, Michael admitted, but I think there must be a middle path between complete exposure and complete destruction, a way to honor both historical truth and family loyalty. Harold studied him for a long moment, as though truly seeing his grandson for the first time in years. Perhaps there is, he conceded, but finding that path will require wisdom I'm not sure either of us possesses alone. As the two men contemplated the morally complex history literally surrounding them, Sheriff Collins appeared at the top of the stairs. "Thought I'd check how things are progressing," he called down, then paused as he noticed the open safe and the tension in the air. "Everything all right down there?" Michael and Harold exchanged a look laden with shared understanding, the first such moment between them in over a decade. "We're working through some family history," Michael called back. "Complicated, but we're finding our way." The sheriff nodded, sensing the delicacy of the moment. "I'll leave you to it then. Just wanted to mention, got word from the county assessor that they need to complete their storm damage report by tomorrow. Procedure for insurance and federal disaster relief." The deadline created immediate pressure. By tomorrow, others would need access to the barn site, potentially discovering the bunker and its contents. "We'll be ready," Harold assured him with newfound determination. "The Jenkins family handles its own affairs." As Collins departed, grandfather and grandson faced each other in the bunker that had already altered their understanding of their shared heritage. Whatever decisions they made in the coming hours would shape not just historical records, but the legacy of the Jenkins family for generations to come. "So," Harold said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his eyes, "where do we go from here, Professor?" Michael looked around at the accumulated evidence of a complex, morally ambiguous chapter of both national and family history. "Together," he said simply, "we find the path together." Sunset cast long shadows across the Jenkins farm as Michael and Harold sat at the kitchen table, a pot of strong black coffee between them. Spread before them lay carefully selected documents from the bunker, enough to tell a coherent story without revealing the most sensitive details. For the past hour, they had been negotiating a compromise between historical documentation and family protection. The university archives could house the administrative records, Michael suggested, tapping a folder containing the least controversial materials. Operation Safehouse's existence would be acknowledged as a rural extension of intelligence operations, without the specific details of the biological research or the identities of the German scientists. Harold considered this, turning his coffee mug slowly between weathered hands. And the technical materials, the microfilm, transferred to the National Archives under a 75-year seal, Michael proposed, long enough that anyone directly involved would be deceased, but ensuring the historical record is eventually complete. The old man nodded slowly. Your great-grandfather would find that acceptable, I think. He never wanted history erased, just delayed until its revelations could do no harm. This tentative accord represented hours of difficult conversation, during which both men had been forced to confront uncomfortable realities. For Michael, it meant acknowledging that his academic commitment to historical truth had to be balanced against real-world consequences for living people. For Harold, it required trusting his estranged grandson with family secrets he'd guarded zealously for decades. "There's another matter," Michael said carefully, sliding a particular photograph across the table. It showed James Jenkins standing beside a young boy who was clearly Harold, with a woman Michael recognized as his great-grandmother Margaret. Behind them stood a teenage girl Michael didn't recognize. This girl, she appears in several photos from 1944, but there's no record of her in our family history. Harold's expression tightened as he looked at the image. "Elizabeth," he said after a long silence. "She was a refugee, Jewish. Her parents had been scientists at one of the German universities before the Nazis removed them. They didn't survive. Somehow she escaped, eventually made it to England, then here as part of the operation. Why isn't she in any family records? What happened to her?" The old man's eyes took on a distant look. "She lived with us for nearly a year. My mother tutored her. My father arranged false documentation, a new identity. After the war, she was supposed to go to relatives in New York." He paused, the weight of memory evident in his face. "There was an accident, a farm accident, the official report said. She was helping with the horses, got trampled. At least that's what everyone was told." "And the truth?" Michael asked, sensing there was more. Harold sighed heavily. "I was just... oh boy, I didn't understand then. But she had been asking questions, growing suspicious about what was happening in the bunker. She was brilliant, spoke German fluently. One night she slipped out, went to the barn while one of the assets was being debriefed. What she overheard..." He shook his head. "The official record says farm accident. I've always wondered." The implication hung in the air between them. Had a teenage refugee been silenced to protect Operation Safe House? Had James Jenkins been involved in covering up something darker than just scientific collaboration with former enemies? "No evidence," Harold continued. "Nothing but the doubts of a child who noticed his parents' haunted expressions. My father was never the same after Elizabeth died. More withdrawn, more driven in his work. My mother stopped playing the piano. Elizabeth had been teaching her German folk songs." He looked directly at Michael. "Some ghosts don't appear in official records, but they haunt families nonetheless." Michael considered this troubling new dimension. "Do you think she's buried somewhere on the property?" "County Cemetery," Harold replied, "under the name Elizabeth Miller. The gravestone says beloved friend, the only acknowledgement my parents could give her. I'd like to visit her grave," Michael said quietly. "Whatever happened, she deserves to be remembered." Harold nodded. "Tomorrow, perhaps. Tonight we need to finish securing the bunker. The county assessor arrives at 9. The mention of the impending deadline refocused their attention on the immediate challenge. They had decided which documents would be preserved through official channels, which would remain secured in family keeping, and which, a small but significant selection, would be destroyed as too dangerous or too painful to preserve. "There's still the matter of what to tell Sheriff Collins," Michael noted. "He's seen enough to know this isn't just an old storage cellar." Dan's a good man, Harold conceded. Known him since he was in diapers. His father served with mine in the local VFW. But even good men talk, especially when they think they've discovered something historically significant. We offer him limited disclosure, Michael suggested. Acknowledge the intelligence connection, but characterize it as a communication relay station rather than what it actually was. Most of the documentation supports that cover story anyway. Harold considered this. Might work. Dan respects privacy, especially when it comes to veterans. He paused, studying Michael with newfound respect. You've thought this through carefully. I'm still a historian, Michael replied with a faint smile. Just one who's learned that family history sometimes requires different handling than academic history. As they finalized their strategy, the sound of tires on gravel announced an unexpected visitor. Harold rose stiffly to look out the kitchen window. It's Collins again, he reported, and he's not alone. Michael joined him at the window, watching as the sheriff's vehicle parked beside a black SUV with government plates. Two men in suits emerged from the SUV, engaged in brief conversation with Collins. Then all three approached the house. Federal, Harold muttered. Intelligence, most likely, must have flagged something in Collins's initial report. The observation surprised Michael. How would you recognize intelligence officers? A ghost of a smile crossed the old man's face. Spent 60 years watching for them. My father said they might come someday. Said if they did, it meant something had gone wrong with the arrangement. Before Michael could process this, a firm knock sounded at the door. Harold straightened his shoulders in a gesture reminiscent of military bearing and went to answer it. Sheriff Collins stood on the porch, discomfort evident in his posture. Evening, Harold. Sorry to disturb you again, but these gentlemen insisted on speaking with you immediately. They're from Department of Defense Historical Recovery Division. The older of the two suited men interrupted smoothly, presenting credentials. I'm Special Agent Carter. This is Special Agent Dawson. We understand you've discovered a military installation on your property dating from World War II. Harold's expression revealed nothing. News travels fast. May we come in? Carter asked, though his tone made it less a request than a formality. My house, my rules, Harold replied firmly. State your business plainly before crossing my threshold. The agents exchanged glances, clearly unused to such resistance. Mr. Jenkins, Carter began again, our division is tasked with locating and securing historically sensitive military installations and materials. We have reason to believe what you've discovered falls under our jurisdiction. 60 years after the fact, Harold challenged. Convenient timing. Grandfather, Michael intervened, extending his hand to the agents. I'm Dr. Michael Jenkins, Professor of History at Grayson University, specializing in World War II intelligence operations. Perhaps I can help facilitate this conversation. The introduction caused a subtle shift in the agent's demeanor. Dr. Jenkins, Carter acknowledged, your work on Operation Paperclip's domestic extensions has been noted in certain circles. The implication that intelligence services had monitored his academic publications sent a chill through Michael, but he maintained his professional composure. Then you'll understand my interest in documenting what appears to be a previously unrecorded extension of that operation. That's precisely why we're here, Carter replied. Such documentation falls under specific national security protocols. Even decades later, Harold had remained in the doorway, effectively blocking entry. Strange that no one from the government has checked on this sensitive installation since 1945. My father maintained it for decades without so much as a thank you. Note from Uncle Sam. Now suddenly it's urgent government business. Collins shifted uncomfortably. Harold, I only reported finding what looked like a military bunker. Standard procedure for unusual discoveries. Standard procedure doesn't usually bring federal agents within hours, Michael observed quietly. Carter's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Jenkins, we have authorization to secure this site with or without your cooperation. We'd prefer the former." "You'd need a warrant for the latter," Harold pointed out, "which we can have within the hour." Dawson spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to overcoming obstacles. Michael placed a restraining hand on his grandfather's shoulder. "Perhaps we could discuss this civilly. We've spent the day cataloguing materials from the bunker. We understand its historical significance and sensitivity." After a moment's hesitation, Harold stepped aside, allowing the men to enter. In the kitchen, the documents they'd been reviewing still lay spread across the table, carefully selected to reveal just enough of Operation Safehouse without exposing its darkest aspects. Carter immediately focused on these materials, examining them with evident interest. "Station 12, he murmured. "One of the missing pieces." "Missing from what?" Michael asked. The agent seemed to catch himself. "From the complete historical record. Operation Safehouse had multiple stations across the Midwest. Most were decommissioned and repurposed after the war. A few, including this one, simply vanished from official documentation." "Not vanished," Harold corrected. "Protected, by arrangement with people who apparently didn't inform their successors." Dawson had moved to examine the photographs Michael had selected, those showing the exterior of the bunker and some of the less sensitive equipment, but none revealing the German scientists or the biological research materials. "This is all you've recovered from the installation?" he asked skeptically. "The site is extensive," Michael replied carefully. "We've only had one day to document it properly." Carter straightened from his examination of the documents. "We'll need to conduct our own thorough assessment. Standard procedure requires we secure all materials related to classified operations, regardless of age." "These are family papers as much as government records," Harold objected. "My father's personal logs, correspondence with my mother, things no bureaucrat has any business pawing through." "Understandable concerns," Carter acknowledged with practiced diplomacy. "Perhaps a compromise. Dr. Jenkins, with your professional background, could assist our team in separating purely personal materials from those with national security implications." It was a reasonable proposal on its face, but Michael detected the underlying strategy: divide the Jenkins men by appealing to his academic credentials while sidelining Harold's proprietary claims. They hadn't anticipated the reconciliation that had begun to form between grandfather and grandson. "My grandfather and I have already begun that process," Michael replied smoothly. "We've identified materials of historical significance that should be preserved through appropriate channels, while respecting both family privacy and national security considerations." An expression of surprise flickered across Carter's features, quickly concealed. "Admirable initiative, but these determinations require specific security clearance and protocols, which my great-grandfather was entrusted with for decades," Michael countered. "His son after him. The government seemed perfectly content with Jenkins' family stewardship until today." Sheriff Collins, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. "Seems to me the Jenkins family has earned some consideration here. Harold's father served his country in ways none of us fully understood. Whatever's down there stayed safely buried for almost 80 years under their watch." Carter seemed to reassess the situation, recognizing that heavy-handed authority might prove counterproductive. "What exactly are you proposing, Dr. Jenkins?" Michael outlined the compromise he and Harold had developed: university archival storage for administrative records, national archives for technical materials under appropriate security seals, and family retention of personal items. As he spoke, he carefully emphasized aspects that would appeal to government interests while protecting the core of what he and Harold wished to preserve or conceal. The agents listened attentively, occasionally exchanging glances that suggested silent Communication. When Michael finished, Carter nodded thoughtfully. Your proposal has merit, particularly given your professional standing. However, we would need to verify the contents personally before authorizing any transfer or disposition. Reasonable, Michael conceded, under appropriate supervision. Harold, who had been watching this negotiation with guarded approval, added his own condition: no removal of materials without itemized receipts and guaranteed return of personal items. We can work within those parameters, Carter agreed, though something in his tone suggested to Michael that the concession might be tactical rather than sincere. With tentative accord reached, the group prepared to visit the bunker. As they crossed the farmyard in the deepening twilight, Collins fell into step beside Michael. I didn't intend to bring this kind of attention down on Harold, the sheriff said quietly. Just followed standard reporting procedures. I know, Michael assured him. But I suspect someone's been monitoring specific keywords in law enforcement reports for decades. Operation Safe House, or Station 12, probably triggered automated alerts in systems we can only guess at. Collins shook his head. Makes you wonder. What's really down there that has them responding so quickly after all this time? It was a question Michael had been pondering as well. The materials he and Harold had reviewed were historically significant, but hardly warranted urgent federal intervention decades after the war's end. Unless there was something more, something they hadn't yet discovered, or something Harold hadn't revealed, even to him. At the collapsed barn, portable lights now illuminated the exposed concrete stairs leading to the bunker. Harold keyed in the security code on a panel Michael hadn't noticed earlier, and the heavy metal door swung open. Lights flickered on automatically, revealing the chamber much as they had left it, though Michael noticed immediately that Harold had secured certain cabinets during his absence. Remarkably preserved, Carter commented, surveying the space with professional assessment. Generator still functional, climate control systems operational. Your family maintained this facility admirably, Mr. Jenkins. Harold accepted the compliment with a curt nod. My father was thorough in his instructions. The agents began a methodical inspection, photographing the layout and examining visible documents with particular attention to classification markings and operation codes. They showed special interest in the maps on the wall, Dawson photographing each one carefully. These indicate operational connections to other safe house facilities, he noted. Some locations we've identified, others remain unknown. The complete network was compartmentalized, Michael explained, drawing on his historical knowledge. Each station operated independently with minimal awareness of others, standard intelligence procedure for the period. Carter had moved to the secured cabinets. These appear to be locked. Family materials, Harold stated firmly. As agreed, those remain private. A tension developed as Carter seemed to consider challenging this assertion. Michael intervened smoothly, directing attention to the central desk where they had purposely left some of the more interesting but less sensitive documents. The operational logs here provide considerable insight into Station 12's communication functions, he said, subtly reinforcing the cover story they had agreed to present. Primarily intelligence relay from European sources, securely transmitting through rural networks to avoid detection. Dawson examined these materials with interest, while Carter continued his assessment of the locked cabinets, clearly not entirely satisfied with their inaccessibility. The dynamic shifted when he approached. The safe in the corner, now closed, but with signs of recent opening. This safe appears to have been accessed recently, he observed. Contents. Harold and Michael exchanged a quick glance, having anticipated this question. Some family heirlooms my great-grandfather stored for safekeeping, Michael replied. Medals, personal correspondence, photographs, we documented them earlier today. We'll need to verify, Carter stated flatly. Harold's expression hardened. The agreement was personal items remain private. Standard security protocols, Carter insisted, particularly for secured containers in military installations. The standoff might have escalated further had Sheriff Collins not intervened. "Seems to me," he said carefully, "that if the Jenkins family has maintained this facility for 80 years without incident, a little trust has been earned. Maybe we could work out a compromise that respects both national security and family privacy." After several seconds of tense silence, Michael proposed a solution. "I can provide a detailed inventory of the safe's contents, certified by my professional reputation. Any items with potential security implications would be noted for appropriate handling." Carter considered this, then nodded reluctantly. "Acceptable, with the caveat that any materials with classification markings or operational significance must be surrendered for proper processing." With this tentative agreement in place, the inspection continued more cooperatively. The agents documented the bunker thoroughly while respecting the boundaries Michael and Harold established around certain materials. Sheriff Collins remained as a neutral observer, his presence lending a local authority counterbalance to the federal officials. As the inspection neared completion, Carter consulted quietly with Dawson before addressing Michael and Harold. "We'll need to assemble a full team for proper cataloging and preservation. Given the historical significance, we'd propose sealing the bunker tonight and returning tomorrow with appropriate personnel and equipment." "A convenient timing," Harold noted dryly, "just when the county assessor is scheduled to inspect the barn collapse." Carter smiled thinly. "The county assessor has been informed that federal authorities have assumed jurisdiction over this portion of the storm damage. He'll focus on the remaining property." The smooth efficiency with which bureaucratic obstacles had been removed confirmed Michael's suspicion that these were no ordinary historical preservation officers. Whatever agency they truly represented had considerable influence. "And our agreement regarding family materials?" Michael pressed. "Stands as discussed," Carter assured him. "Our interest is preserving historical accuracy while respecting appropriate security protocols, not disrupting family legacy." As they secured the bunker for the night, applying temporary federal seals to the door, Michael noticed his grandfather watching the proceedings with a complex expression, part resignation, part relief, and part something darker that suggested not all had been revealed even to him. Back in the farmhouse kitchen, after the officials had departed with promises to return early the next morning, Harold poured 2 fingers of bourbon into glasses and pushed one toward Michael. "They'll be back before dawn," he said quietly, "with more personnel and different questions." Michael accepted the drink, studying his grandfather closely. "You anticipated this all along, didn't you? From the moment the barn collapsed?" Harold nodded slowly. "My father said someday they might come. Said if they did, it meant something had changed in the world, something that made the secrets under our barn valuable again." He took a careful sip of bourbon. "He left instructions for that possibility too." "What kind of instructions?" Michael asked, unsettled by the implication. Instead of answering directly, Harold reached into his pocket and withdrew what appeared to be an old-fashioned pocket watch. He set it on the table between them, its tarnished silver case reflecting the kitchen light. "This belonged to my father. Swiss-made, precision craftsmanship. Still keeps perfect time after all these decades." He opened the case, revealing not just a watch face, but a small key secured in the inner cover. "One final security measure for the contingency we're now facing." Michael stared at the key, understanding dawning. "There's another locked container in the bunker, something even you didn't show me today." Harold's weathered face revealed nothing. "Some secrets weren't mine to share until absolutely necessary, even with family." "What does it open?" "A floor safe beneath the main desk contains the actual records of what happened at Station 12, the complete, unredacted truth." Harold's voice had dropped to little more than a whisper. The kind of truth that might still be dangerous, even almost 80 years later. Michael's historian's mind raced with possibilities, while his newly strengthened family loyalty grappled with implications. Why tell me now? Harold met his gaze directly, years of solitary burden evident in his eyes. Because before those men return at dawn, decisions must be made about whether certain truths see the light of day at last, or remain buried forever. And after today, I don't believe that decision should be mine alone anymore. The pocket watch ticked steadily between them, counting down to a moment of truth that would test both their reconciliation and their individual principles. Whatever lay within that hidden floor safe represented the final, most carefully guarded secret of Operation Safe House, and by morning its fate would be decided, one way or another. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as Michael and Harold made their way back across the darkened farmyard. The full moon cast enough light to navigate without flashlights, which suited their purpose, remaining unobserved. Though the federal agents had departed hours ago, neither man fully trusted they weren't being monitored somehow. I switched off the perimeter sensors, Harold explained as they approached the collapsed barn. Another system my father installed, primitive by today's standards, but effective enough. Michael glanced at his grandfather with newfound respect and curiosity. The Harold Jenkins he thought he knew, stubborn, provincial, trapped in the past, was revealing himself to be considerably more complex. A man who had maintained decades of vigilance over secrets most never suspected existed. "How often did you check the bunker?" Michael asked, as they carefully picked their way through the debris. "Monthly. Regular maintenance, system checks. More frequently during the Cold War years." Harold moved with surprising agility for a man his age, muscle memory guiding him through familiar terrain despite the destruction. "Less often lately. Getting old makes climbing those stairs harder." At the bunker entrance, Harold performed the now familiar security code sequence, adding an additional numeric pattern Michael hadn't seen before. "Disables the secondary alarm," he explained. "The one I didn't mention to our federal friends." Inside, the bunker appeared exactly as they had left it. Federal seals intact on the cabinets the agents had been prevented from examining. Harold moved directly to the central desk, kneeling with effort on the concrete floor and running his fingers along the underside of the central drawer. "Help me move this," he instructed. "The mechanism needs pressure in two places simultaneously." Together, they pressed hidden triggers, and with a soft click, the entire lower portion of the desk shifted slightly. Harold withdrew the pocket watch key and inserted it into what appeared to be a barely visible keyhole in the concrete floor, revealed by the desk's movement. 2 full turns of the key activated some internal mechanism, and a small section of the floor separated, rising slightly on hydraulic pistons that had remained functional for decades. 1940s engineering, Harold commented with a hint of pride. Built to last through nuclear attack if necessary. The revealed chamber contained a single metal box approximately the size of a thick textbook, secured with another keyed lock. Harold withdrew a second key from the watch case's hidden compartment, opened the box, and lifted out a leather-bound journal similar to the captain's ledger they had examined earlier, but in pristine condition. "The real record," Harold said, softly, almost reverently. "Not the sanitized version for potential discovery, but my father's actual account of what happened at Station 12, written in his own hand, kept separate from all other documentation." He handed the journal to Michael, who accepted it with the careful hands of a trained historian, accustomed to handling fragile documents. He left instructions that this should never be opened unless absolutely necessary. When the government, finally came to reclaim what they'd abandoned. "And you've never read it?" Michael asked, weighing the journal in his hands. Harold shook his head, respected his wishes. The burden of knowing was enough without knowing everything. He gestured to the journal. "Until tonight, now decisions must be made that require full understanding." The box had contained more than just the journal. Harold removed several microfilm canisters, each labeled with simple numeric codes then operation names, and a small metal cylinder with what appeared to be a seal of some kind at one end. "Insurance," he explained, indicating the cylinder. "If certain parties attempted to restart what was ended here, this would release information to specific individuals. Dead man's switch, essentially." Michael examined the journal's cover, unmarked, except for a small embossed symbol he recognized from his research, the specialized insignia used by certain highly classified intelligence operations during the later war years. With careful reverence, he opened to the first page, where his great-grandfather's distinctive handwriting announced, "The True Account of Station 12 Operations, 1943-1945. Captain James Jenkins, for family eyes only, upon necessity." The pages that followed confirmed what they had already discovered while revealing much that had been deliberately obscured in the official documentation. James Jenkins had indeed been recruited specifically for Operation Safehouse due to his unique combination of military intelligence training, scientific background, and the isolated family property suitable for conversion. The initial entries described the bunker's construction, disguised as agricultural improvements during wartime rationing, and the facility's gradual transformation into what James called a reluctant necessity of terrible times. Early operations involved debriefing resistance operatives extracted from occupied territories, using the farm's isolation to allow their recovery before redeployment or integration into domestic intelligence. By late 1943, however, the station's mission had evolved dramatically with the arrival of the first German scientific assets, a neutral term that James increasingly questioned in his private account. December 15th, 1943. Asset 2, Dr. Heinrich Schaefer, continues providing technical information regarding the Harz Mountain facility experiments. His knowledge is extensive and disturbing. While he claims no direct participation in the human trials, his detailed understanding of results suggests otherwise. I find myself conducting debriefs with scientific professionalism while inwardly recoiling at what civilized men have done. In the name of progress, Margaret questions the morality of our work here, offering sanctuary and new identities to men who have contributed, however indirectly, to atrocities. I cannot offer satisfactory answers. Command insists these men's knowledge is vital to national security, that Soviet forces would exploit them without our moral qualms if they reach them first. I understand the strategic necessity while harboring growing ethical doubts. Further entries detailed the scientific programs being extracted, primarily focused on biological agents developed in German laboratories using horrifically obtained data from concentration camp experiments. The Jenkins farm had served as both debriefing center and temporary research facility, where the most promising defensive applications were separated from offensive capabilities deemed too dangerous to preserve. Michael read with growing discomfort, as his great-grandfather documented his internal struggle, balancing patriotic duty against moral revulsion. February 8th, 1944. We have secured the partial research records from Facility X today. The contents sicken me beyond description. That human beings could conduct such experiments on others, detailed documentation of exposure effects, progression, of symptoms, time to death, all recorded with scientific precision as though the subjects were laboratory animals rather than people. Colonel Hargrove insists we must preserve this knowledge to develop countermeasures should such weapons ever be deployed against our forces. Better to learn from their monstrous work than repeat it ourselves, he argues. The logic is sound, yet feels like moral quicksand. Where does necessary compromise become complicity? Harold watched Michael's face as he read, gauging his reaction. Now you understand why he kept this separate from everything else, why the official record shows only sanitized versions. Michael nodded soberly, turning pages that revealed increasingly troubling details about Operation Safehouse's true nature. Not merely an intelligence outpost, but a facility where knowledge obtained through atrocity was sifted, catalogued, and selectively preserved for potential American use. Then came entries about Elizabeth, the refugee girl who had briefly been part of the Jenkins household. April 12, 1944. Elizabeth continues to thrive under Margaret's tutoring. Her facility with languages proves invaluable for casual conversations with our German guests, who speak more freely when they believe no one else understands them. She is, however, increasingly curious about the barn's restricted areas. Her intelligence makes her both an asset and a security concern. June 18, 1944, incident with Elizabeth today. She overheard Schaefer discussing Facility X experiments with Asset 3. Her reaction, understandably horrified, required intervention. Have explained the complexity of our mission, sworn her to secrecy. She has agreed to discretion, understanding the importance of preventing this knowledge from falling into Soviet hands. But her eyes now hold something I cannot bear to acknowledge. Trust broken can never be fully restored. The final entry about Elizabeth, dated August 3, 1944, confirmed Harold's worst suspicions. God forgive me. Elizabeth discovered Schaefer was directly involved in experiments that killed her own cousins at Facility X. Confronted him with evidence she had pieced together from overheard conversations. The security breach was complete and irreparable. She threatened exposure, planned to contact OSS contacts in Chicago with what she knew about our harboring of men she called monsters. Colonel Hargrove ordered containment protocols. I argued for alternatives, relocation, controlled disclosure to trusted OSS personnel, overruled, assets deemed too valuable, program too essential to risk exposure. The official record will show a tragic accident with the farm horses. Harold witnessed the aftermath, unavoidable given the commotion. He is too young to understand what truly happened, thank God. Margaret refuses to speak to me. The household that briefly felt like a family again is shattered. I am complicit now. Not just in preserving tainted knowledge, but in silencing an innocent to protect the guilty. Whatever moral high ground I claimed is lost. I follow orders and hate myself for doing so. Michael looked up from the journal, meeting his grandfather's eyes. You were right. Elizabeth didn't die in an accident. Harold nodded grimly. I suspected. Never knew for certain until now. His voice grew distant. I remember that day, the shouting, then the terrible silence, men I didn't recognize taking her away, mother crying for days afterward. Father changed forever. Michael continued reading, discovering that in the operation's final months, James Jenkins had become increasingly disillusioned while maintaining his outward compliance. The journal detailed his creation of hidden contingencies, duplicate records, securely concealed evidence, instructions left with trusted contacts to be activated if anything happened to his family. Most significantly, James had secretly copied the most damning materials regarding Facility X experiments and the identities of all German scientists processed through American intelligence channels. This insurance file included proof of atrocities, documented involvement, and the subsequent American protection of key figures, explosive information that could destroy reputations and shatter historical narratives even decades later. The microfilm, Michael said, looking at the canisters Harold had removed from the hidden safe. His insurance policy, Harold confirmed, and now perhaps ours. The journal's final entry, dated March 1945, revealed James Jenkins' final act of both compliance and rebellion. Station 12 officially decommissioned today. Most materials transferred to secure facilities under Army control. The German assets have received new identities, university positions, research opportunities with appropriate oversight. They will contribute to American scientific advancement, their pasts conveniently obscured. I have performed my duty to my country while establishing my own safeguards against historical amnesia. The official record will show what command wishes it to show. This private account, along with secured evidence, will remain concealed but preserved, a testament to truths too uncomfortable for official acknowledgement. I return to conventional military service tomorrow to maintain my cover story. When I eventually come home to my family and this land, I will bring with me the burden of knowledge and complicity that no man should carry. I will work this soil, raise my son, and remember daily what happens when scientific advancement is severed. From moral constraint, Margaret has agreed to maintain our marriage, despite what Operation Safe House has cost us both. Whether forgiveness is possible remains to be seen. Elizabeth's presence haunts every room of our home, every corner of my conscience. Should anyone find this account in some distant future, know that I acted as I believed necessary in time of war, made compromises I will answer for before God, and establish this record so that truth, however painful, would not be eternally buried beneath sanitized history. Michael closed the journal slowly, the weight of its revelations settling over him. His great-grandfather had been simultaneously a patriot following orders, a scientist preserving valuable knowledge, a moral man compromising his principles, and ultimately a keeper of dangerous truths. Now you understand why I've maintained this place, Harold said quietly. Why I was prepared to destroy everything when the barn collapsed. Some truths remain dangerous even after those directly involved are gone. Michael carefully placed the journal on the desk. The agents who came. Today, they're not just after historical preservation, are they? Harold shook his head. They want containment. The government has maintained its sanitized version of Operation Paperclip and related programs for decades. Scientists with Nazi connections were reimagined as apolitical researchers who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The full truth of who was protected, what they did, and how much American officials knew would still cause significant damage. Plus the biological weapons research itself, Michael added, knowledge that was preserved despite its horrific origins. Knowledge that may still exist in classified archives, Harold agreed grimly. My father believed certain research was too dangerous to preserve, but suspected portions were retained, despite official assurances of destruction. The complexity of their situation settled heavily between them. Whatever decisions they made before dawn would have implications far beyond their family legacy. What do you think he would want us to do? Michael asked finally. James Jenkins, the man who created this reserve of truth but kept it hidden for decades. Harold considered the question carefully. He was a man divided between duty and conscience, between national security and historical truth. He created this insurance policy but never triggered it, even when he had opportunities, suggesting he saw its value as a deterrent rather than something to be deployed, Michael observed. Perhaps, Harold acknowledged, or perhaps he simply never faced a moment that justified releasing such destructive truths. Never had to make that final judgment. Michael gestured to the federal seals on the cabinets. And now that decision falls to us, with federal agents returning at dawn. The grandfather clock's distant chime marked the passing of another hour. Their window for action was narrowing. We have three options as I see it. Michael said, thinking aloud. Surrender everything and trust the government to handle these materials appropriately. Destroy the most sensitive evidence before they return, or find some middle path that preserves truth while minimizing potential harm. Harold moved to the wall maps, studying the connections between European facilities and American stations. 4 generations of Jenkins men have protected this land, he said quietly. But what exactly were we protecting? American security interests, historical truth, evidence of complicity in morally questionable actions, perhaps all of these simultaneously. Elizabeth deserves justice, Michael noted. Her truth deserves acknowledgement, as do the victims of Facility X, whose suffering produced knowledge our country utilized, Harold added. The weight of history, both national and familial, pressed upon them as they contemplated options that would have repercussions beyond their individual lives. Whatever course they chose, by dawn, the fate of Station 12's most carefully guarded secrets would be decided once and for all. I think, Michael said finally, that there must be a way to honor both my great-grandfather's service and his moral qualms, to acknowledge difficult truths without causing needless harm to institutions necessary for current security. Harold nodded slowly, a decision crystallizing in his eyes. I believe I know what he would have us do. Together, grandson and grandfather bent over the scattered evidence of a morally complex past, working through the night to determine which truths would see the light of day, which would remain secured for future generations, and which, if any, would be permanently laid to rest alongside those who had created them. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when they finished. Each aspect of Station 12's legacy now categorized, documented, or prepared for whatever fate they had determined appropriate. As they secured the hidden floor safe for what might be the final time, Harold placed a weathered hand on his grandson's shoulder. Whatever happens when those agents return, he said quietly, I'm glad it was you who came to help make these decisions. Your father would be proud of the man you've become. The simple statement, more personal than anything Harold had offered, in years reflected the transformation in their relationship over the past 24 hours. From estranged relatives to reluctant collaborators to partners in a profound moral reckoning, their shared Jenkins heritage finally serving as a bridge rather than a barrier between them. As they ascended the concrete stairs to meet the dawn, and whatever it might bring, both men carried with them not just the burden of difficult decisions, but the quiet strength that comes from facing complex truths alongside family who understand both the weight and the necessity of such moments. The first light of morning illuminated the collapsed barn, transforming what had initially seemed a simple structural failure into what it truly was, the exposure of long-buried history that would forever change how they understood not just their family's past, but the compromised foundations upon which portions of modern security had been built. 3 federal SUVs arrived precisely at 7 a.m., agents efficiently deploying equipment and personnel around the bunker entrance. Carter and Dawson approached the farmhouse where Harold and Michael waited on the porch, coffee mugs in hand, calm determination in their posture. You've been busy, Carter observed, noting their expressions. The seals on the bunker door have been disturbed. Family business, Harold replied simply, had some decisions to make before surrendering our heritage to government custody. Rather than responding with the expected bureaucratic objections, Carter exchanged a meaningful glance with Dawson. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. In the kitchen, Michael placed a single thumb drive on the table between them. We've prepared a comprehensive digital archive of Station 12's administrative operations, university-level historical documentation, properly catalogued and annotated. And the more sensitive materials? Dawson asked carefully. Harold produced an envelope containing the microfilm canisters, technical documentation regarding Facility X and related operations, includes evidence regarding Elizabeth Miller's death and the true backgrounds of scientific personnel processed through this facility. Carter's expression remained professionally neutral, despite the clear reference to information they hadn't disclosed knowing about. These will require secure handling protocols. They'll receive exactly that, Michael agreed, at the National Archives under appropriate security classification. I've prepared formal transfer documentation as a professional historian with security clearance, which I assume your agencies can expedite. The subtle power shift was unmistakable. No longer were Harold and Michael supplicants facing government authority, but equal negotiators with leverage of their own. You seem to have thought of everything, Carter noted cautiously. Almost everything, Michael acknowledged. There remains the matter of Elizabeth Miller's proper recognition. A formal acknowledgement of her service and sacrifice added to official records. And a review of my father's military status, Harold added. His actual rank and service record deserve historical accuracy, even if the specifics remain classified. Carter studied them both before responding. These requests seem reasonable, given the circumstances. I'm authorized to negotiate certain accommodations in exchange for full cooperation. By noon, agreements had been formalized. The bunker would be professionally documented, its contents preserved through appropriate channels, with both historical integrity and security considerations balanced. James Jenkins would receive posthumous recognition for his true service record, while Elizabeth Miller would be acknowledged as a civilian casualty of operational security requirements, her sacrifice finally receiving a measure of official recognition. Most importantly to Harold, the Jenkins family role in maintaining Station 12's security for decades would be respected rather than erased, with Michael granted ongoing academic access to appropriate materials for authentic historical documentation. As specialized teams continued their work at the bunker site, Michael and Harold walked to the small family cemetery at the far edge of the property. There, beneath an ancient oak tree, lay generations of Jenkins family members who had worked the same soil. Your great-grandfather would approve of our solution, Harold said, gazing at James Jenkins' modest headstone. Truth preserved without unnecessary destruction, justice acknowledged without vengeance. A middle path, Michael agreed, like he tried to walk himself. You'll write about this someday, Harold observed. Not just the sanitized version they'll allow immediately, but eventually the fuller truth. Michael nodded. When classifications expire, when the complete story can be told without harm to living people or current security, I owe him that, and Elizabeth. I never understood why he was so insistent that I maintain this place, Harold admitted. Checked those systems for decades, never fully knowing what I was protecting. Now I find myself almost relieved the burden has been shared, and with someone who understands its complexity. They stood in companionable silence until Harold spoke again. You know, that university position keeps you pretty busy, but this farm won't run itself once I'm gone. Michael smiled at the oblique invitation, the closest Harold would come to asking him to maintain their reconnection. I've been thinking I could use a quiet place to write, somewhere with history in the soil. When they returned to the farmhouse, Sheriff Collins was waiting, curiosity evident despite his professional demeanor. Everything getting sorted out with our federal friends? As well as can be expected, Harold replied. Sometimes the past needs careful handling before it can properly rest. Later that evening, as government vehicles finally departed with their carefully catalogued materials, Michael and Harold sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The collapsed barn stood partially cleared, its hidden secrets now documented and secured through official channels and their own private arrangements. "You'll come back?" Harold asked without looking at his grandson. Michael nodded. "History has a way of pulling you back to where it began. Some stories need to be told by those who understand all their dimensions." The story of Station 12 would eventually reach the world, not as sensational exposure, but as carefully contextualized history, a testament to moral complexity in desperate times and the generations who protected difficult truths until they could be properly understood. As darkness settled over the Jenkins farm, grandfather and grandson continued their quiet conversation, rebuilding connections that had been severed for too long, planning for both preservation of the past and cultivation of the future. The legacy of 4 generations remained intact, transformed rather than destroyed by the storm that had exposed its most carefully guarded secrets. If this extraordinary tale of hidden history, family secrets, and moral complexity captured your imagination, there are more untold stories waiting to be discovered. History's most fascinating narratives often lie just beneath the surface of what we think we know, buried in plain sight until circumstance reveals their existence. What secrets might be hiding in your own family's past? What untold stories shape the world we inherit today? Subscribe to our channel for more remarkable historical discoveries that challenge our understanding of the past and illuminate the complex choices that created our present. Next week, we'll explore how a forgotten diary found in a Virginia attic revealed the underground network that helped hundreds escape persecution during one of history's darkest chapters. You won't want to miss this powerful story of ordinary courage in extraordinary times. Remember to like, share, and tell us in the comments what historical mysteries you'd like us to investigate next.